waiver of Frank Greenberg et al. Case of Louisville Metro Ethics Commission, case number C24.005. Is the complainant ready to proceed, Ms. Mayor?
We are done.
All right, do you identify yourself and your party with you correctly?
Yes, I'm Jim Gary. I'm counsel for Teresa Hathaway, known as Terry Hathaway.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Cousins?
Amy Covich, I'm here with my colleague on here on behalf of Jeff O'Brien and Josh Lynn.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. So I guess the first matter I'd like to cover is separation of witnesses. Are there any witnesses? Counsel, if you'll just look around and see if there are any witnesses besides the parties here that they intend to call. Just make sure they're outside of the hearing of the witnesses. You want to check on that?
Oh, no. I believe as far as the word witnesses, the next one who is not a party is Grant Myatt, and Jeremy Dexter, and then she's
Okay.
is out. So
Okay,
she shouldn't just be showing up.
that's fine.
So we shouldn't.
Good, thank you very much. Okay. All right, so would you all care to give a brief opening, kind of let me know how we would do it?
Yes, Your Honor. We have, as you know, there was a multi-count complaint filed in this case, and in the preliminary period of time, when the case, motions were made respondents to dismiss certain of those claims, and they were in fact dismissed. We kind of objected to that. We had a hearing on it, and all the parties stated their positions at that time. But what Your Honor allowed to remain was the reprisal claim, and Ms. Hathaway had been terminated as part of this process for a job that she held with Metro as a local Metro officer or worker. And so because of that, the reprisal claims did not for us to present evidence of that issue. And we are. And what we're trying to do and have tried to do in our preparations is organize it as efficiently as possible. As you can see from the timeline, she was hired in September of 2020, and she was terminated on June 7, 2024. She received promotions during this period of time. She actually had been assigned a supervisory position, and supervisory duties as a part of her job. And then suddenly, during this period that you hear about in the course of this case, she was told that she was not a supervisor, and they were going to have to address that. And she was promised that she would be a supervisor, and they would make some changes, but ultimately that never happened. In fact, a number of things happened in the course of time, and they decided what they'll do is just post a new position. And that she needed to reapply, which was really a very demeaning type of thing for her from the standpoint that she had this and had worked months and months and months. In fact, she received in March of 2024 a glowing evaluation in terms of her abilities and what she had done, and she never had any reprimands or anything like that. All this time that these things led up. She did not receive any explanations of why she was terminated. She did have a number of things that she brought to people's attention over the course of the last several months of her employment. And they involved issues that she felt strongly about regarding Metro. She has had a history of working as a finance officer at other organizations, and non-profit organizations with their finances. She had a strong sense of looking after funds in a not-for-profit or in other types of organizations from the standpoint that was her job. She was training her job, and it was in this case. And so when she had concerns about anything in terms of streams of funds that were used by Metro, then she brought it to people's attention. And sometimes people would address her afterwards and saying, we don't want you to talk about this. And so she did continue to do those things. And then, of course, there was this sense of what was going on at the end, and she couldn't understand why she was not provided what she was promised she would be provided. And she was assured would happen in terms of her job. It's like serving as an attorney for so many years, and then somebody says, well, we're gonna change all that, we wanna retrain you, but you haven't been retrained, so we're not post your job. It was just a very frustrating situation. For that reason, we believe what happened, and as you will hear more thoroughly in the presentation of evidence, that the reprisal plan is appropriate, and that we feel the evidence we have here wants that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Perry. Ms. Taylor, do you want to give an opening, or you want to reserve it till the beginning of your case?
Well, I think that the presentation of evidence in order to this meeting is we're going to, normally call it this is once.
Okay.
So I don't think there's going to be a.
I understand.
Per case and our
Got it.
case. I didn't plan to give you a large opening,
That's
because I
fine.
know we need to do
Okay.
listening briefing, but I think just suffice it to say, you might believe in this Hathaway and very close, but after reviewing some of this pretty proposal, in fact, we will firmly demonstrate that Ms. Hathaway's termination had nothing to do with her various and sundry complaints that she could be talking about today, but rather because of her failure to discharge her job duties and the disruption she was causing in the workplace.
Okay.
So we will obviously address that in the evidence today and post it in the record.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, so ready to proceed?
We are, Your Honor.
Mr. Gary, go ahead.
We'll call Terry Hathaway as our first witness, and as I understand it, Your Honor, she takes the seat there.
Yes, right there by the table there, or behind the table. Morning, Ms. Hathaway. You raise your right hand. You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Gary.
Would you state your full name for the record?
Yeah, Teresa Hathaway, I go by Terry Hathaway.
And where do you currently reside?
My home address or
Yes.
just Louisville? My home address is,
Did you file an ethics complaint in this case?
I did,
And I'm going to hand you what, I guess we'll mark as exhibit 1, Your Honor. I just
Okay.
want to make sure it's in the record.
Sure. Everybody's seen it.
Right, you got a copy and you need to know.
Mark it exhibit 1.
Thank you. Ms. Hathaway, that collection of papers I gave you contains both the original complaint and then your supplemental or amended complaint. Is that accurate?
yes,
Okay, thank you. And is it verified? Is it verified, Sam, by you?
yes,
And did you in fact carefully go through all the facts that you alleged, and are they in fact accurate
yes.
and true to
yes,
the best of your knowledge?
yes.
Okay. And with that, tell me a little bit about yourself and the folks here. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Washington State, outside of Seattle. I've been here in Louisville for about 12 years. I came here by way of Cameroon in Central Africa, where I met my husband, and we lived there for about 5 years before moving to Louisville. I was in the Seattle area through my master's degree, so I have a bachelor's in social welfare and a master's in public administration.
Thank you. What types of jobs have you held with regard to finances?
The majority of my professional career has been working in nonprofit organizations. In the time since I came to Louisville, I worked primarily in administration and finance of nonprofit organizations. So largely doing grants related work. In my job just prior to this position, I was both the finance and development director at 53 neighborhoods.
Did your job experience and your training give you any type of sense of transparency and with regard to financial jobs that you held and positions you held in terms of the monies and funds you were working with?
Yes.
And in that way, did you ever hesitate to report to those that were in your organization any concern you had with regard to any finances or financial issues?
In fact, with Metco, I was required to report any possible fraud or concerns that there were, and there were several, cases related to loans that I had reported prior to any of what started happening in this case.
Okay, so if you saw an issue with regard to finances, you reported it, simple as that?
Yes,
Okay, and you considered that a duty?
yes.
Okay. Did anyone ever tell you, no, you don't have to do that in this organization?
I don't know.
Okay. With regard to your job, we've got, of course, this outline. It shows that you were hired on September 10, 2020. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And what position were you hired into?
The working title was Metco Loan Administration Specialist. I was recruited and hired, interviewed and hired by Brenda Hyatt. My understanding was that she was my supervisor. She was the one I had the primary contact with as I was being selected for that role. I understood it was an appointed role, and so it did go through the same process that other Metro employees that are not appointed would go through in terms of the HR process.
Well, explain to us what it means to be an appointed role.
My understanding is that it is appointed by the mayor. Essentially, you're serving at the pleasure of the mayor, more or less. And the majority of positions in the department were appointed positions at the time that I was hired in 2020. Then in 2023, my position, like many in the department, changed in July of 2023. It became not appointed, and that was associated with a compensation study that went into effect at that time. So I then became not appointed.
Okay. And once you undertook this position, where were you physically located? Where did you work?
444 South Fifth Street on the 6th floor, which is where the Economic Development Department was, along with, I think, one other department, and then the heads of what's now known as the cabinet.
And your job title was?
When I was first hired, Metco Loan Administration Specialist, and then in July of 2022, I was promoted to the Metco Manager role, and that's the working title for that role.
Okay. Tell us a little bit. You mentioned loan supervision.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about Metco. I think that is that in fact an acronym?
Yes. So Metco is the Metropolitan Business Development Corporation. It is a separate nonprofit entity. It is fiscally administered by local metro government. It's been around for 40 years. And it's a collection of revolving loan funds, which are used for small business and commercial property redevelopment. So at the time that I was there, the portfolio was valued somewhere between $18 to $20 million, with about $12 million now circulating loans in the community.
Okay. And that was its role, is to work to support community needs in that fashion in terms of the funds needed for certain given projects. And you were a part of that process.
Yes.
When do you, what types of income streams were involved with Metco? I mean, these funds, you mentioned that they might come through Metro government, or explain to us how that works.
So the original funds were all seeded from some sort of public funds. A lot of it was federal money, some of it was state, some of it was city funds. And then as the loans, the money that was originally granted would then be loaned out, and then when the loans were repaid, the principal and interest would be repaid into the revolving loan fund. So the idea is that over time, with the interest and any fees, that the pot is growing. Now there are some that are going to default or be written off eventually or have bad debts. And so from time to time there would be new influxes of funds from either new grants coming in or new allocations.
Okay. And with regard to grants, were you ever involved in working on those type of things for funds?
I was. Several of the streams were still under federal grants at the time. Some of them were not. I assisted with one of the loans or one of the grants being defederalized during my time, which meant that the federal government was no longer going to be involved, we no longer had to report. And that was a very long-standing loan fund that we had to report on for many, many years. And then I actually had come in, and my position was initially funded through a grant that was for COVID relief loans. And so I was assisting I did a lot of reporting and oversight and had relationships with the federal grant coordinators.
It seems like these days we have one of our overriding problems is weather. And, in the last few weeks, in September of 2020, you had another problem, as I understand it. It was during the COVID pandemic, correct?
Yes.
Did that have any impact on the operation of Medco?
I mean, this was a very chaotic time. I initially started speaking with Brenda about the opportunity for this role, I think in July of 2020. And then my start date was in September. My understanding is, like many, municipalities, Louisville had received a number of different funding sources to do types of COVID relief for businesses. And so there was a very large pool of funding for grants, for COVID relief grants that was going to small businesses. And then the pool that came to Medco was for small business relief loans. And so these were loans that were going to be repaid, but at very low interest, and they were unsecured. And so it was a time that most people were now working from home, although the small business staff and Medco staff were still coming to the office. So when I started, I was one of the few people coming physically to the office. I know that it was just a time that, it was like drinking from a fire hose. People, all this federal money is coming in, and people are trying to get that money out in the best way with as much due diligence as possible.
Were you actually directly involved in disbursement of COVID funds?
For the COVID relief loans that I did, yes. So the grants, there was money for grants, which was a much larger pool of money. But the pool that I came in under was about $3 million. And originally it was about $2.7 million was allocated for loan capital. And then there was several $100,000 for administration costs. And one of the things I was actually able to do was reduce the administrative costs so that we increased the loan capital. We made over $3 million in loans during that time. It was a total, I believe, of about 70 COVID relief loans that were made.
You're on the folks.
Sure.
I'm going to hand you what my mark is exhibit 2.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hathaway, can you identify that collection of documents that I put together for exhibit 2?
Yes. So these are documents from my official personnel file from Louisville Metro Government. After I was terminated, I did an open records request for my full file. So some of these documents, that was the first time that I saw them. The one thing I would say is that the performance evaluation that was included in my official file had missed the middle page, and I luckily had a copy of a hard copy of my evaluation, so I was able to add that page back in.
And that's actually a part of those documents, right?
Yes, but presumably they just missed it when they scanned the file and sent it to me.
Now, with regard to the documents you have in front of you, mind just walking through those? Our hearing officer has them as well, to kind of explain what's on each page.
Yeah, so several of these are position personnel action forms. And so the first one is my original hire on September 10th, 2020. And the job, the action is hiring. Reason, I'm not sure what MAP stands for, MAP, but that is what that one is. The second one, and this is something that we'll talk about, that was a point of dispute in the department, was whether or not I had been promoted in July of 2022. And so the second document is showing that somebody, presumably Human Resources, had corrected the form, and so the action is changed from hire to promotion. And again, MAP, I'm not sure what that stands for. So this is again coming from my personnel file. I always understood that I was promoted in July of 2022 because when I was originally hired, I was a W-2 employee. I had never been given any sort of a contract. I was aware that I was under grant funding, but I was never given any paperwork or contract that indicated that it was anything other than just a normal W-2 position. And so therefore I always assumed it, and Human Resources actually verifies it twice, once on this form and then once in an email from the Human Resources Director that I was in fact promoted in 2022.
So in other words, these records that you got, the old records of your job and your applications, they demonstrate that you received a promotion on
Yes.
July 1, 2022.
Yes.
Did that promotion involve supervisory duties?
Yes, yes, and so this was an unusual situation, but the person, Brenda Hyatt, hired me in 2020, and we then flip-flopped roles in 2022, essentially. Before she had hired me, one of the things that she told me was that she intended to either retire or try to go part-time before the end of the grant was up, and she sort of to incentivize me in taking the position, repeatedly told me that she was interested for me to take over the role of managing the program before the grant was up, so in about 2 years. So at the time that I was promoted, she had done, and I give her credit for this, she had done a lot of work to push for the addition of a halftime role to support Metco before the grant ended, so that she could move into a part-time role and then I could take her position. So it was always understood that at that time, and the department understood this, that I was then her supervisor.
Okay, now, as we look at this outline, or timeline, I should say, you're hired in 2020, and then September 2020, July of 2022, the promotion comes into effect, as you just explained. And in between those two dates, you worked with Brenda Hyatt. Tell us about your all's work, collaboration, the way you work together, things like that.
Yeah. I had a lot of respect for Brenda's knowledge and experience in banking. She came from a banking background. I understood that when she came into Metco, she was the only staff for Metco. She came in at a time when there were a lot of delinquencies. The portfolio was a bit of a mess, and she did a lot of work to clean it up. When she and I worked together, she trained me. We worked very closely together. We had a lot of, I think that we often felt like we complemented each other. That we would have a lot of discussions when one of us was not sure what to do with a loan application or something. And so I think that we had a lot of camaraderie and respect. That during that time, she supervised me and she was training me. And I think what she was telling me was, she largely wanted me to take over. And so she, I think, was training me in that regard.
And so she had been with Metco for many years, right?
I think 5 years at that point, yeah.
Okay. So, and in this interview process, in the job search, she picks you, or she's involved in that selection. And then she's determined that you will be the one that takes over her position.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And that's after you all work together all this period of time.
Now, I will add, there was somebody else who needed to sign off on
Okay.
the promotion, but that she had really orchestrated and facilitated that process.
She would present that to whoever her supervisor was. They would have to approve it, of course.
Yes.
But they would look at her, tell them who should we put in this role, correct? Okay. Now, I think we can go ahead through those documents. You mentioned a performance evaluation.
Yes, and so this is the one and only performance evaluation I received. It is for the year 2023, but it was completed on March 1st of 2024. I had never received one before because appointed staff do not receive performance evaluations. So it's only after I became a non-appointed staff, like many others in the department, that we now were required to have performance evaluations completed.
Who performed this evaluation?
Joshua McKee.
That he's seated here with us this morning?
Yes.
Okay. And had you known Mr. McGee?
Yes, we've been in the department together since that had started, but we didn't have a lot of substantive work together, so we hadn't really crossed paths much until he became the interim director in February of '24.
Okay. And so in any event, what was the nature of this evaluation? Was it a positive evaluation?
Yes, I believe, I took this as being very positive. Every category was, meets or exceeds requirements with many very positive comments from him.
In fact, did you get excellent ratings over some of these topics that you're looking at in evaluation?
I took it as, exceeds requirements is what it says. So, I took it as very positive.
Okay. Had you ever received a reprimand prior to this day?
No, never,
Okay. Did you ever receive a reprimand?
no.
Not even before you were terminated?
No,
Okay. Just what you think. And so, there's certainly no reprimand in this performance evaluation, and you did not have an opportunity to be evaluated again, I take it?
correct,
This is the only one that was in existence at the time of your termination.
correct.
Okay. With regard to the other documents, does that complete that packet?
No, after the performance evaluation, there are 4 pages that are related to, as we'll talk about in more detail, when it's revealed that there's a misclassification about my position,
Right.
they say that what they're going to do is back pay me for the time that I incorrectly supervised Brenda. So they acknowledged that had been supervising, they said I was not supposed to have been, and that they would back pay me for it.
Can I ask
Yes.
one point?
Yeah.
Who is they? When you say? they?
Supervisors, so I would say, these are, for example, Josh McKee, this memo is from Josh McKee. So I'd say he's the most immediate person with the knowledge of both Jeff O'Brien, Shonda Barlow, she is the Human Resources Liaison within the Cabinet of Economic Development. And then I would assume, that Keisha Swan is also in consultation, who's the Assistant Director for the department.
Sorry for that.
No problem. Anytime. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now, so in any event, well, let's move ahead. You were talking about these other documents and the fact that you talked about this issue of the discovery that you had supervisory duties and that your position technically did not include those. Did I summarize that accurately?
Yes, and the one thing I would add about these documents, and we'll go into more detail later, is that there was a dispute over the date that it should start. And so I was back paid for October of '23 through February of '24. However, I began supervising her in July of 2022. And so, we'll talk about this later, but I do provide them with documentation that I have been signing for timesheets, which seem to be the key piece of documentation to determine supervisory responsibilities.
Okay. Now, did that basically finish up those items? Those are the employment-related items that we tried to put together in one spot. Are there any things that you had there that we haven't covered?
The last item is the termination form. And the one thing I would note is that the reason is dismissed, and then the do not rehire box is not checked. So I am eligible for rehire.
Okay. And that's significant, is it not?
I believe it is, yes.
Now, if I may approach. Sure. I'm going to hand to you and to the parties and witness. What I'll mark is, I believe it is it three.
Yep.
Oh, sure.
Appreciate it. Ms. Hathaway, please describe what I handed you, those few documents that mark this exhibit 3.
This is a printout of a web page from the Economic Development Department. This is from May 11th, 2024. And so this is the page that has the pictures and descriptions of all of the staff, the About Us page. And the primary thing I wanted to show was that because my title at some point is disputed, or what I'm told that I can or should use to refer to myself. But on the last page of this, you'll see that I am identified on the website as the Metco manager, as well as that Brenda Hyatt is identified as a Metco loan specialist. So we're identified with 2 different titles.
Okay, because you actually had worked in the loan specialist area yourself, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
And again, yes, we flip-flop roles.
okay. Now, with regard to Brenda Hyde, was there ever any question in your mind that you, as far as you can see, your all discussions, that she fully knew that you had supervisory responsibilities during this period?
Yes, I would approve her time off, and she would check with me about her schedule, and I signed time sheets, and yes.
You did all the things a supervisor would do for Ms. Hyde, right?
Yes, in fact, I was preparing to do her performance evaluation when all of this started to unravel.
Okay. Just another supervisory duty. No question in her mind that you were her supervisor at that time.
Objection, I don't think she testifies to what was in the
I agree with that.
Okay.
Praise that.
Let me approach with what will mark as Exhibit 5.
Yeah. Now, I've got,
Exhibit 4.
I think this is 4.
Oh, is it 4?
Yeah, I apologize. Thank you. No worries.
Now, can you identify the documents that I handed you and mark Exhibit 4?
Yes, and I'll start with saying that I had never received a formal job description for the role I was filling when I was the Metco manager until, well, really I received it in, and being told that it's my job description in February of '24. The top 3 pages of this is the job description for the classification, the class title of Economic Development Coordinator. So although Metco Manager was my working title, Economic Development Coordinator was the classification, the formal title from Human Resources. This came about, I received this, I believe, in December of '23. And it came about because I was actually in the process of hiring an additional loan specialist position for Metco. And so I was working with getting the job posting ready. So there were a flurry of emails going back and forth. And this is before Josh was, Mr. McKee was the interim director. So my former supervisor and then some of the administrative staff were working to get this posted. And it came to my attention that this was the classification for the role, and I felt that there was a real disconnect between what this said and what the role for the loan specialist would be. So I didn't feel that I was going to get a good pool of applicants from this job, description of what would get posted and advertised. And so I pushed back and said, we need to rewrite this. And I helped, what we ended up doing, the workaround was to add a section at the end of it that would create like a subdivision for Metco loan specialists. So the next version, after those first 3 pages, the next version is, again, the job description. And this is kind of let's see. So it's, looks like it's 5 pages, 1 to 5. And I'm given a copy of this on February 23rd when I meet with Josh McKee and Sean Barlow, and I'm told that this is my job description. And so this is the first time I'm really understanding that this is my position as an economic development coordinator. And this now has the section that I've written for the Metco loan specialist.
So you had been asked to write a description, and that's actually going to be used, ported into your new job description.
Yeah, I didn't feel, I really never understood or connected that I was an economic development coordinator. That was a title that was never used really with my role. And so when this is, in December, I'm trying to advertise for an additional position. I've gotten approval for some new funding, some restricted funding, and we're trying to post that position. But then very quickly by February, as we are realizing that the economic development coordinator, which is my classification, does not allow supervision. And also that it is also the same classification that Brenda has. So I'm supervising somebody with the same classification. And so in February, on the day when I'm told that I'm no longer supervising her, I'm given this job description, told this is my job. And so, this is what I am doing.
Okay, now let me, stop you just for a moment. In February of 2024, and I think it's actually on another slide, we're still on this broad picture, but in February of 2024, you learned for the first time that you're not going, you don't have supervisory responsibilities or duties as part of your position, is that correct?
Correct. It's the first time it comes to the attention of human resources that I am supervising, and yet I'm in a classification that does not allow supervising.
To understand the way that the timeline works, we show your promotion in July 1, 2022, right?
Yes,
Were you aware that you had supervisory duties at that point?
that was, yes. I mean, Brenda had supervised me when I was, so when we flip-flopped roles, I understood that I supervised her.
And you did supervise her, and there were no issues raised about that.
Correct.
None of your supervisors or anyone else at Medco came and said, this is a problem, why are you signing your timesheets and why are you doing these other things, correct?
Correct.
And so you continued to supervise until this document is presented to you, and that's roughly February of 2024?
Yes.
And for the first time, you're told you're not doing job classification, and I know you've described it, but it's kind of hard for those of us that don't work in that environment to understand that your job description does not include supervisory duties. Is that the best way to say it?
Correct. It's simply not listed as, if you look at other classifications, even some at the same level, this is a level 119 position, other classifications will sometimes say, supervision of other staff or whatever, and it's just, devoid of, it's not listed here, and therefore it is not a duty.
Now, he already indicated you never had any complaints about your supervisory duties, things like that, up to this moment when you're just told your job description does not include it.
Correct.
And you won't supervise anymore.
Correct.
And is another position going to be created that will involve supervisory duties, or how did that work?
What I've been told is that there's, so just to back up, this starts because in December 2024, as I'm preparing to hire an additional position, I realized, it's the first time I realized that I am classified the same as Brenda. So the program, as we'll talk about, was on the cusp of growing. So I had anticipated it was on the cusp of growing. And I made a formal request for a reclassification of the position. And that was in December. In February, when my former supervisor was no longer there, I brought that to Jeff O'Brien's attention. And at this point, I didn't realize the supervision was any issue. But because of my request for reclassification, it brought up that there was an issue with that I was doing something outside of my classification role. And so at that point, I'm told that I need to stop supervising, that they're going to remedy that by back paying me for the supervising I did do. But they also tell me that there's a freeze on reclassifications because the compensation study had gone into effect. There's a freeze on reclassifications until the end of the fiscal year. I didn't know that until I was told. And so so what I'm told is that and when I say they, I mean Jeff O'Brien and Josh McKee, that there's going to be a workaround, that there's an open position in the department, that their intention is to reclassify that as a supervisory role, and it will be posted, and I will have the opportunity to apply for it.
Now, let me ask you, this is going to be a position that's going to involve the duties that you've been doing since July 2022?
Correct.
And you've been doing without any complaint or issue being raised and brought to your attention?
Correct.
Or reprimands?
Yes.
And in fact, the 2023 performance evaluation was very positive about all the work you've done in this time frame.
Yes, although that evaluation is done about a week after this all starts to happen. So after I've been promised that they're going to post a position.
So is it accurate to say you're being told that you will have to apply for this new position?
Yes,
Well, how did that impact you? I mean, you've been doing that work, correct,
yes,
for many, many months now.
yes.
And now you're told, well, never mind that, you've got to reapply for this new position anyway.
Yeah.
With others, I assume.
I have been doing this for a year and a half. I've been doing the position for a year and a half. And I was, I felt I was pretty humiliated. Part of it also is that I learned that I wasn't a supervisor sort of third hand. Nobody directly told me. And I felt pretty demoralized and humiliated about how I was being treated, and it was in a time where there was a lot of uncertainty about, there was change happening in the department, there was some uncertainty, and so it was quite nerve-wracking. It also felt like, I felt like it had been their responsibility, that it was their mistake and their responsibility, that I had been doing this job for so long. It wasn't my mistake. I had always known that this was part of my job. And so I did push back and ask them that I would hope that they would remedy the situation by taking, seeing it as their responsibility and fixing it, rather than saying, looking at it as I was asking for a reclassification and then a freeze.
So is it accurate to say no one had ever complained to you or criticized you for doing this, this supervisory duty? They didn't even brought it to your attention prior to this date?
Oh, no, yeah, no.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, but still, and so it was clear that they just didn't pick up on this and didn't realize.
Yes.
But did that occur? Was a new position posted? And did you apply for it?
No, it was not posted. I ultimately waited about 6 weeks, with, all the conversations that were happening, particularly with Mr. McKee. I was led to believe that it was still in process. And then in, I believe, April 12th, that Mr. O'Brien came to my office and informed me that it would no longer in fact be posted, that they considered that I was properly classified for my duties and would not supervise. And so for, I felt like it went from February 23rd, I had a very clear promise that this was going to happen. Although I was not happy about it being something that I would have to apply for, and I wanted them to fix it more immediately, with things, there were several open positions in the department. I knew that people were pretty overwhelmed. I knew Josh had just taken on the director role and had a lot on his plate. So I tried to be patient and wait out those 6 weeks as what I believed was I was being promised that would eventually be posted.
So this is another frustration added to your prior frustrations?
Yes.
Because after 6 weeks, what had been promised to you is that this is not going to happen. You're going to stay in your role without any supervisory duties, period.
Yes, and I felt that it had been withheld as a retaliation for something else that had happened during that. At that point, I thought it was just for one thing that had happened in that time.
And explain to us what that one thing was?
In March, there was a team of consultants that I helped to introduce to Deputy Mayor Hathaway and to Jeff O'Brien, and who were then contracted, and that's from an organization called Council of Development Finance Agencies, or CDFA. And CDFA came and did a 2-day site visit here in Louisville as part of a contract they were doing for an assessment. During that 2-day site visit, there was a closed meeting that I was that I participated in, as well as Mr. McKee and Mr. O'Brien, Deputy Mayor Malloy, a number of other staff were in there with the consultants. Part of what we did was a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And we were looking at the development finance landscape of Louisville. And so in economic development, how do we use public dollars to incentivize the type of development that we want to shape the city? And so in that process, I had identified the West End Opportunity Partnership as a potential threat. It had also been identified as a potential opportunity. And so the consultants asked me to explain why I put it up as a threat, and I did. And the next day, I was talked to by Mr. McKee, and I felt that I was being rebuked for my comments, and told that this was a priority project of the mayor, and of the governor, and that I was not to say anything publicly disparaging about this project.
But you never had said anything publicly disparaging about the project, is that accurate?
Correct, it was only in a closed meeting.
And the closed meeting was just the people that already know these things. They asked for this collaboration, right?
Well, and I felt that the comments I was providing would be, I thought it would be welcome in terms of, identifying critiques and weak points, and to be able to ensure that people, close on the inside are aware of some of the issues, so that you can see the blind spots.
I mean, to the extent that they saw that from others as well at the table, right? Others that were part of this room in this meeting.
Yes, I mean, I think that there was, I was under the impression that we were having a very candid conversation in closed, behind closed doors.
Correct. So after your meeting with Mr. McKee the next day, I guess, with regard to the idea that don't have any negative things in public about this, did you feel anything change in this relationship? Your job?
After we spoke, I'd say
Yes.
yes. I very much felt that I had been scolded, that I was, one of the things he had said was that he had been told, that other people, he had been instructed to speak to me and to find out what I had meant by my comments. And I didn't necessarily right away feel, that there was any sort of, connection to those comments. But once the position that was supposed to get posted was withheld, this was the only thing I could imagine that had really switched their view of me.
So the position you were promised told would have now is no longer available to you, correct? Just walk us through, first of all, the performance evaluation that we all looked at just moments ago, dated March 1, 2024, which was actually for the year 2023, but it was done after this meeting. Mr. McGee.
It was done after it came to light that I was not to be a supervisor,
Okay.
but before the comments. So it is, that's March 1st. The comments in the closed meeting happens on March 14th. And then on April 12th, I believe, is when I learned that there will no longer be a position posted that I can apply for.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can I get more water? Do you mind if I
Oh, that's
fill my
fine.
glass?
Feel free to take this with you. Handy. Ms. Hathaway, picking up where we just left off, is it these meetings that you're having, one of Mr. McGee, one of Mr. O'Brien, did any of these, were they ever described as disciplinary meetings or any form of a reprimand to you?
The only thing that ever, came close to that is on May 10th of 2024. And that is that I'm called into a meeting and given a document called the Conversation Law. And I believe we have a recording of that meeting that we'll play later. But I do ask in that because it has a section for disciplinary actions, and I do ask, is this a disciplinary action or a disciplinary meeting? And I'm told, no, it's not. Likewise, when I requested my personnel file after I was terminated, that conversation log was not sent to the Human Resources Department. So, I never received any sort of reprimand. There was never anything in my personnel file.
And as you noted, even on your termination, you could have been rehired, so the box was not checked, not rehired. And let me just conclude quickly, we're gonna go back and review a few of these things in more detail. One of the things I wanna ask you about right now is we talked about some phone calls and phone conversations and recordings that were made. And they have been exchanged with the parties, everybody's got a copy of the audio file. And we will probably try to play the audio file here today. It's always challenging in this kind of hearing, we'll just see how things work. But the bottom line is you've actually got a transcript of the audio file that we're going to use as an exhibit in this case, correct?
Yeah.
Which is also something everyone can look at. There's always a value in hearing the voices and sensing the meeting when you hear an audio file, so we'll try to play one shortly. But to just conclude what we're doing here with regard to this employment history. You're terminated on June 7th, 2024, correct?
Right.
Now, you had been told early on, when it was discovered that there was this question about your supervisory duties, which Ms. Hyatt, of course, knew all about. You signed off on the time slips, things like that. It was something that was going to be taken away from you, but you saw a reclassification at that point in time, internally, correct?
I had sought the reclassification prior to that even becoming an issue.
Okay.
So just simply because I felt that the duties of the position were growing, were on the cusp of growing, and that it was a more technical job than what I thought others were doing in the department with the same classification. So I requested that reclassification. But then out of that process, I happenstance, it was revealed that there was, that I was not properly classified to be a supervisor, which was an existing responsibility. And so after that is promised, that they'll post a position that I can apply for, and then I learned 6 weeks later that in fact there will not be any position posted for me to apply for. I continue to advocate for myself and for the responsibilities I had when I was hired for this position. And to continue to try to find ways to have that corrected before filing an HR complaint.
Tell us about the plan to file an HR complaint. What actually came about?
Yeah. So the first time I stated to Mr. O'Brien and Mr. McKee that I intended to file an HR complaint was on February 26th, I believe. This is shortly after they've a few days earlier, they said they, promised me that they would post a position that I could apply for. And I still felt that this was their responsibility in the state to correct. And so I did let them know that I would like to have this resolved internally and voluntarily. But if we weren't able to resolve it, that I did plan to file an HR complaint and that I was looking at legal representation.
Okay.
Now, I didn't file an HR complaint at that time.
Okay.
I did not file one until May 10th.
So, and you continued to withhold filing an HR complaint for several weeks, is that correct?
Yes, I initially waited the 6 weeks because I was waiting for them to post the position, and I thought we were working towards that still. And then I think on April 16th, I again verbally let Jeff O'Brien know that I intended to file an HR complaint, but I held off because I realized that there was one more option. I was trying to exhaust all of my options before doing that, and there was an option to make a formal request for a compensation adjustment. So I pursued that before filing the HR complaint. I then waited until May 10th, and then I finally filed the HR complaint. And then I added some revisions to it on May 28th.
We'll get to that later too, we've got copies. But At any point, after all of this, you're terminated, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain exactly how that led up and what happened that day?
I think from March, April, May, June, mostly April, May, June, and things became very difficult and very tense. Were increasingly difficult. I think I had retained legal counsel at that point. It would take me quite a while to find somebody. So I think in May that I had retained counsel and I was getting legal advice about what to do. A few days before, May 31st, I believed I got some additional information that led me to believe Mr. O'Brien had lied to me about why they could not create the supervisory role. And it was increasingly feeling that I was being, pushed out of that I was going to be pushed out of the department. So it was a very difficult space. It was very difficult to be trying to remain productive and work within. And then on June 7th, which was a Friday, about 4:30 in the afternoon, Mr. McKee called me to the conference room, and I was given a termination letter. It listed several, personnel policy numbers that it said I violated, but there was no detail. And when I asked for any other information, I was told to contact the Human Resources Director for any other information. I was then allowed to get my personal items, and then I was then escorted out of the building by security.
How long did the meeting take?
Less than 5 minutes.
And again, and I'm not trying to be redundant, was there any, whether in writing or otherwise, any clear indication to you the reason for the termination?
No, I did not receive any other details about why I was being terminated until months later through this ethics process. I received additional information.
Okay, the filings of the ethics complaint.
Yeah.
And when did you file the ethics complaint?
I filed the original ethics complaint on June 13th. So 5 days after I was terminated, again on a Friday, so June 13th.
Your Honor, I just want to say, I want to see if we can take a short break.
That's
Get ready to move to it.
Any objection to that?
No objection.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a short break. That'll be fine.
For myself, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, I know you're watching the live stream right now, but I want to take a moment to tell you to check out this new book right here over my shoulder. Believe me, it'll be worth it.
The lights of Kentucky Performing Arts shine on more than our shows. They illuminate a pathway of discovery for all throughout our Commonwealth. A pathway of creativity, confidence, possibility, of brilliance, inspiration, curiosity, and wonder. For 40 years, Kentucky Performing Arts has led a pathway to unite the Commonwealth around the joy of discovering the arts, and will continue to shine this light far into the future.
was that?
Our last exhibit.
Four?
Four.
Okay, double check. Okay, we're back on the record. Ready to proceed,
Yes, sir.
Greg? Go ahead.
Thank you much. If I may, I've got another exhibit. I'd like to,
All right,
this would be my exhibit 5.
5, thank you.
Ms. Hathaway, if you would, please, describe those documents that we've collected and included in this exhibit 5.
This is, let's see. Let me look at it for 1 second. So towards the back, is the original email. I think it's because it was forwarded and whatnot. But they're on, there's several emails to my former supervisor, Benjamin Moore, with my formal request for reclassification. So I originally write to him on December 7th, 2023. And I say I'm formally requesting a review and reclassification of my position as Metco manager, and then I give a little more detail. And then I recently learned I was classified the same as the person I'm supervising. And then I asked him again about it on February 7th, a day or so before he leaves the department. And then I bring it to, on February 8th, I sent an email to Jeff O'Brien, forwarding my request for job reclassification, and I CC'd the HR liaison for the cabinet. And I because Jeff, Mr. O'Brien was Mr. Moore's supervisor, so my supervisor's supervisor. So I'm letting him know that I've had this request. I haven't heard anything, it's been 2 months. On February 22nd, on this email chain, Mr. O'Brien responds and says, I believe Metco needs a supervisor, especially as we add positions. However, there's some challenges we'll need to work through to create a supervisor position. This is after, so between February 8th and February 22nd, they verbally let me know there's an issue with how you're currently misclassified. And that's the first time we start talking about it, and I'm informed that there's an issue around the supervision. And then the first bunch of pages of this exhibit is, and that I'm going to have to compete for, that feels very, I was feeling very vulnerable about that. And I felt that they had made a mistake, and it was their responsibility to correct, and so I sent this email. I included some attachments, the strategy that I had written, a 3-year strategy for Metco to expand, and essentially my goal was to double the lending of Metco and also to improve the equitable access to credit within the Metco portfolio. It's supposed to be a more flexible tool that you're reaching folks who may not have access to traditional bank financing. So how do we also make that a tool that the folks who are coming into that realm, we're helping set them up for success rather than just setting them up for failure. And so one of the things that I ended up identifying as an opportunity, and that I spent a lot of time working on at that time, is a program, an initiative called through CDFA, which I mentioned earlier. They had an equitable loan capital guarantee program. They were putting out a call for proposals, and I worked with 5 other community organizations as an ecosystem to create a proposal. And what we were trying to, if we were accepted, we would have access to a $3 million loan guarantee pool. what that would do would be to enable us to extend credit and loans to folks who would otherwise not be able to secure their loans. So even though we're supposed to be a more flexible tool than traditional bank financing, we're still fairly conservative because of our collateral requirements. Having a loan pool or a guarantee pool would help to allow us to still make loans even when somebody isn't able to fully secure their own loan. So it would be a backstop if there was a default on a loan. This money would help to make sure that we don't lose money. It allows the program and the board to be able to take extra risks that they would not necessarily take otherwise.
Is it fair to say that you were personally and emotionally very invested in many of those programs and its role and operations?
Yes, I found that working on inclusive economic development was an area that, I mean, this seems like the answer to so many of our disparity and justice issues that we have today. So I started out my career in social work and social welfare and nonprofit work, and found that this programs like Metco, and we're really creating opportunities to include more folks into the economy, into the economic development system, into the American dream, is a space that makes a lot of sense.
You're dealing with a lot of significant need, and where there is need for this change process for applying for loans.
Yes, and so one of the things I think I found was that the program Metco had not had a lot of prioritization and leadership to sort of, bring it up to speed over many years. And so as I connected with CPFA and attended their trainings and attended their national summits, I found that there was national best practice around revolving loan funds and opportunities to do the work in a better way that's along the lines of national best practices, including, and I think it's on the next slide, I participated in a 6-month cohort for an equitable lending leadership training that was sponsored by the EDA, the Economic Development Administration, which is where one of our primary grants comes from.
And for those of us who aren't familiar with Metco, that, as you stated, had a very low profile. It is providing another alternative to traditional financing.
Correct, so it's loans, it's all loans, but at various interest rates and for very targeted items, but for small businesses, it's often used for startup or for expansion.
I think it was John Carson once said, a bank is the place you go to borrow money if you can prove you don't need money.
Yeah.
This is a totally different situation, right, where you have a keen need, and you have to put these other things in place to get these funds out of the door. When you, well, let me do this to move along a little bit. I've got, a handy note exhibit we got on it.
Number 6.
You said, John.
Just as a preliminary matter, I'm going to object to this exhibit as, already said that they're going to tender the audio recording, which
Okay.
is the best evidence, and the best evidence rule
Okay.
is also not a certified transcription by a person. So to the extent that you will consider this, I know this is an administrative proceeding, you
Sure.
can consider what you want, but, I would object to the, transcript and request you listen to the actual audio, whether or not being played out loud for purposes of time or not.
I understand the objection, I oppose it for the simple reason that there's no harm in foul here. If you have the audio and you have the transcription, we can't get any more complete than that. I looked at it as a chance to be able to say you've got involved, and if you need to, it makes it easy to refer to something in a particular portion. It's something that the witness has worked on and prepared.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I think the tape, or the recording does need to be played.
Yes.
And can she or another witness describe how the transcript was prepared?
I think so, right, we'll do it right now.
Okay.
Ms. Hathaway, I think I'm accurate in saying that you actually prepared this transcript,
Yes.
okay? And can you explain to our hearing officer how that was done?
Yeah, so this includes two separate transcripts for two separate audios. So the first one is for the meeting that takes place on February 23rd.
Okay.
And I think that's the audio we're gonna play shortly.
Mhm.
I went home and I transcribed the audio, from our meeting. And in fact, the first time I include it, and send it to Mr. O'Brien, Mr. McKee, is as an attachment on my, when I submit on February 26th, when I send them the misclassification remedy request.
Okay.
The other two documents that are also in here, the conversation log and then the transcript for May 10th. Again, that's a recorded conversation of a meeting I have with Mr. McKee and Ms. Swan. And the document that they gave me to sign, that Mr. McKee gave me to sign. And so I went down and I transcribed it.
Now, we're gonna go ahead and play the audio, Your Honor, I have a connection with all this.
Correct.
Because we wanna make sure it's in the both of them, is what we hold. And then, of course, it's there for cross-exam or anything else that would be needed, but before I do that, Ms. Hathaway, as I understand, you mentioned the log. At some point, were you asked to log your time? At work? It was very much.
Feeling very vulnerable right now in my employment, and want to ask some questions about what the expectations are of my role right now and what exactly my. November of 2023, I became aware that my position was classified the same as hers, as my employee that I believed I supervised. I had received the paperwork about the, compensation and what my, title was or whatever, but I hadn't paid a lot of attention. I did not know what her classification was. I did not know what she was paid. That didn't come to my attention until November. And I realized that I was making less than her, despite the fact that I had taken over all of the program responsibilities that she had previously. And in addition, I felt like there were a lot that she hadn't been doing, and I was doing at a higher level. So based on that, I requested a reclassification. And out of that process, now we're bringing it to yours and
Could you say